Okay, so Christopher.
Hurry up, Chris.
So
Open the rainbow.
we were talking, and
Shut your door slowly.
you know what really messes with you?
Like a civilized. What?
10
Close
years.
your door.
It's 10 years after the fact? Yeah, 10 years. Holy shit. 9, 10 years. I'm still making decisions based on avoiding.
I'm going to lay down in the bedroom.
Okay.
I'm not up to date with this.
Still making decisions to avoid the person who assaulted me, you know. He too is a gamer. So I don't go to the shops. I don't play D&D there. When game nights was still open, I didn't go, didn't play at the tables or anything. I've been into this stuff for quite some time, you know, and I avoid places because I know he might be there. Because, you know, I don't even know if it's the same areas. That it doesn't matter because he will go out of his way to go to different ones. And now we live sort of within the vicinity of one, and I'm like, cool. We go there, and then I'm like, no, wait, we need to go to, like, I don't know, McDonald's or Wendy's or something, because, you know, just to screen new players, because we wouldn't invite them, you know, here. Because you need to get to know people first, know if they're safe or not. You don't just bring them into your home. And I'm still doing it. I'm still making decisions based on and isn't that a depressing thought? There's this article that I read, it seems like forever ago, about this judge who said that it ended, you know, whenever it ended for the guy. You know, whenever they finished. No, actually, rape doesn't end whenever it ends for them. It continues affecting your life and your decisions afterwards. You avoid certain places, certain people. You might even lose entire portions of your friend group because how dare you? You know, before that, the incident whenever I was 16, I still can't go to that house. You know, I still avoid going in that house because of the multitude of things that happen there. My grandfather has redone the whole thing, and I can't get past the fact that it's the same house that my grandmother did all that crap in, and that I had to live there after being assaulted in my own room after my grandmother set me up. You know, and that's the thing. Most of the stuff that happened to me directly because of things that my grandmother did. This was just me trying to get away from it. And then I ran into this guy who's like, who acts like he actually cares what happens to me. And the trap was that there was no pressure to date him at first. It was just, that was the trap. And I've learned how not to fall for that trap. And there were all sorts of warning signs I might have seen otherwise. Except I'd come directly out of a situation where while I was homeless, I was held against my will and all this. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I was always afraid that someone would come drag me back like they did back then. And, there was a lot I didn't see that I would have normally seen, even with my history with my grandmother. AJ was not subtle. And then, because my family was completely not there again, I walked right into my ex-husband. So I'm not proud of it. Those two, my kids weren't mistakes. Make no mistake about that. But those two definitely were. The only reason I don't regret it is because it led to Rowan and Rohan being born. But I don't know what he thought that he was going to call it. Because when you leave and you have your best friend playing lookout to make sure that I don't leave, that's and I have to like get around that. That's not making this a willing situation. And apparently there was actually footage. The apartment complex that we lived in recorded things. The thing is that you didn't save the recordings. So the guy at the front desk knew. And he actually apparently kept an eye out after some things. He didn't know the extent of it, but he knew that something was going on because he'd seen what he did to me in the elevator whenever, I was trying to get away from it. But he couldn't do anything because, there was another woman in the complex that was raped in the hallway, and it was all on camera, but there were no tapes because the company that owned this place was so cheap, they wouldn't pay for the tapes. So she couldn't get justice for this because even though she did everything right and there were supposed to be tapes, there wasn't tapes. So it wasn't like he could really do anything because there were tapes. There are actually a multitude of reasons that things happen. My younger years, I went through like this sort of domino effect of situations. And it was specifically because after all this crap happened, there are people who will use that, who will see that as an opportunity. Oh, well, you're already kind of traumatized. Here, let's traumatize you some more. And my family was literally using the fact that this happened as an excuse to say that I just kind of wanted it to happen. They were basically using the fact that their lack of involvement caused more problems to justify their lack of involvement. My relatives are fucked up, okay? They will use the result of their actions to justify their actions, and they're continuing to act that way. Personally, I think it's because they are just that adverse to admitting that they're wrong. My grandmother used to lie about me, and to not just my family, but it actually took me years to straighten out my medical and, yes, my psychiatric history as well. I don't see or hear things that aren't there. I do not have psychosis. I have never had psychosis off of medication. on medication. See, that's where things get murky. Because as a kid, they would put me on all these pills at my grandmother's insistence or at the state's insistence while I was in foster care. And they would just keep on piling them on. They would even diagnose you based on things that the medicine caused. And it was just a mess. And they do this to a lot of people. And unlike in other states where they'll kind of make it an issue, in Arizona, I've never heard of them ever doing that. There are countless cases where they will medicate infants and 3-year-olds. I was actually 6 whenever they decided to give me a bunch of medications you're not supposed to give anyone under the age of 21. Like, this was some pretty extreme shit. And my grandmother just used it because she liked attention, and I actually only found out as an adult that my mom had a will, a living will that she had done, that specified that none of us were to ever be alone with our grandmother. If anything ever happened to her, it was that we were never to go to my grandmother or any house that she was in. And the reason was there. She specified that my grandmother was abusive, controlling, and would do stuff, she didn't really go into a whole bunch of detail, but she did specify that she was abusive. So it's not like nobody knew. It's not like it wasn't there to know. It was just my grandmother had, and you know what's really fucked up? My mom only became the black sheep in the first place because one of my grandmother's brothers tried something, and she told on him. He didn't even succeed at it. He just tried, and she told on him, and she was 12. My grandmother dragged her out of the house, put her in a stint. I don't mean like physically put her in a stint. I mean she threw her by her hair, and she ended up in a stint for a week because of the strain on her neck. I actually found out that my grandmother and my mom used to have about the same relationship that, my aunt did. They didn't have a bad relationship, and then that happened, and my grandmother snapped. And she destroyed her own daughter. And then she kept on destroying her reputation, she would get her fired from jobs. I actually saw this happen. The first time that my grandmother did this to me, I resolved that she could never know where I worked. Because she was doing the same shit to me that she had done to my mom, and I knew that she would never stop, because she never stopped with my mom either. It didn't even matter if she was happy with you or not. She was always angling for something. She always was trying to get sympathy, for your very existence. But not towards you, only towards her. And I was like, there's a reason I hate sympathy. It's not empathy. Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. You're feeling with them. Sympathy is feeling at them. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened, as I continue to live my life, and don't try to imagine how you actually feel. You're just kind of feeling at them. And sympathy is a lack of understanding. And often you can feel sympathy for something that isn't even real. Empathy doesn't really work like that. I mean, in theory, you could call sympathy empathy at times because you don't realize, but there's a difference. Empathy generally requires some level of understanding, and also not you lording over them. Most of my relatives, all they really knew about me was what my grandmother said. I was completely isolated from them by the time I met some of my family members whenever I was older again. Like my Aunt Rosalind would not even let me hold my cousin because she was because of stigma. And it didn't matter, whenever I got older that I didn't even have these things. The fact that she did this to begin with was just bad. I was not allowed to be part of this family because I had diagnosis. It didn't matter that they were under false pretenses or anything. It was just there and stigma, and they would believe anything that my grandmother would say. And whatever hysteria that they had about these things, which is what it's called whenever somebody just assumes things based on a label or like something that they have a hysteria about. It's like a social hysteria, stigma, about something. And my Aunt Rosalind actually stood there on the beach and told me I wasn't allowed to join the rest of the family whenever they moved spots on the beach, because she didn't want me around my baby cousin. So it was the one time that I was even out there where I could visit. I literally could not go with my little brother, who was later adopted by our aunt, Sherry, my mom's little sister. And I couldn't go with my little brother, Alex, because I actually almost died that summer. Yeah. Funny story about that. See, the older cousin that was supposed to watch over me, he felt kind of, he didn't want to go with them, but he also didn't really want to watch me either. He just wanted to hang out with his friends. So he gave me his boogie board, told me that if I lost it, that he would hate me forever, he would never forgive me. And I took this very seriously. Because, I hadn't seen him since I was 4 years old. And I'd always looked up to him whenever I was little. And then suddenly, here he was telling me these things, and I was like, well, I can't lose it then, And I tried to go out with him. I was terrified of the deeper water. But I wanted to at least try and be close around my cousin, even if all I was doing was sort of playing with the water nearby. I didn't want to be a bother, and I was trying not to be. It didn't seem like it actually worked, though. Pretty much, I was just a bother to him as far as he was concerned. So when the riptide got me, he completely ignored me, or I don't even know, maybe he didn't even hear me. All I remember is screaming and trying to reach for him. And, funny enough, not letting go of that boogie board probably saved my life. Because I almost let go of it a couple times. There were a couple times where only the fear of him hating me forever had me holding on to it. As far as I know, my older cousin doesn't know me as anything past whenever I was little. I know that my uncle would not allow my grandfather or me to obtain any sort of information to contact them. So whenever I sent the invitations to my wedding, I had to send them to my uncle, who I later found out actually kept all the invitations that I sent away from the people that they were supposed to be for. So none of my cousins got their invitations. And I was actually told that, since they didn't tell me that when my cousin was getting married, until I was getting married, we actually got married about the same year, they basically said, yours isn't important. Well, I had no way of knowing that his wedding was then, because nobody had told me. They wouldn't tell me where. All I was told by my Aunt Sherry is that I wasn't invited. That's what my family's like. You want to know what gatekeeping looks like? picture being related to people who basically build up this wall and you're not allowed inside. And if anything happens to you because you're locked out, because you're locked out, they'll hold that against you as just another reason to keep you locked out. It must be your fault. You must have done something. And it doesn't matter that you didn't. You're just locked out. And then, you're alone and shit happens whenever you're alone. The world is a big, dark, and cold place. Shit happens to people. When you don't have family around you, shit happens. And I had to build my own family around myself. And then, of course, my brother had the compunction to get upset about that. He would say underhanded things. And I was like, well, you're not here. Be here. Maybe if you were here, maybe if they were here, I wouldn't have to. These are the people who are here. These are the people who, aren't leaving me outside the walls. No, the walls aren't as high. It's more like sandbags compared to them, but it's something, and it's people watching each other's backs and banding together. And I've lost a lot of people because, a lot of these people came from the same sort of place I did. Some of them I lost to drugs because they couldn't handle it. Some of them, like Carl, I lost to violence. Someone just walked up and shot him. There was no real reason for it. And the younger guy had held the gun to him, and he used the technique I taught him to disarm. And then the dad of the guy, because I don't even know, why didn't he stop his own son? And then the dad just pulls out his gun and empties the entire clip into him. He was gone. He was just gone. Tatum killed herself. It's listed as natural causes, but she was trying for quite a while. Technically, it was natural causes, but it was her repeated attempts that caused it. Her body became too weak because she kept on, if you have diabetes, you don't take your insulin, and you need insulin like she did, and then you drink an entire gallon of Tampico, and then and be saying, I want to just go to sleep and never wake up. Yes, I'm sorry, but that is a suicide attempt. And the hospital wouldn't do anything for her because she had no history of anything mental. And I'm like, she's clearly attempting to kill herself. Her family is saying it. I'm saying it. Everybody's saying it. And eventually she attempted it so many times that she really did just go to sleep and never wake up because there had been so much damage to her body from all of the attempts. She just faded away. I've lost people. And do you want to know why she did this? Because she couldn't take how this had affected her family. She couldn't take all the fighting between them. She couldn't take her mom's rejection because her mom couldn't handle what happened. She couldn't take her dad's attitude towards that. It wasn't even just her mom. It was the fighting. There were people in her family that blamed her mom, even though she was saying, look, I remember what happened, and my mom didn't do anything wrong. Or, she would say, yeah, I understand what you think she did wrong, but she didn't. And nobody was listening to her. They just kept on fighting kept on being dick faces to each other, and she couldn't handle what CPS had done to her family. She couldn't handle the damage and the things that her mom did to try and insulate and protect her other sister. You know, and there were just so many feelings in all this, and she killed herself. There are countless stories like this that go on, you know, and there's some where kids kill themselves because if they can't live in a world that has their family in it, they don't want to. And I don't just mean has it in it. I mean, being a part of it. There are people who kill themselves over this, and it would actually be considered normal. As a kid, I even attempted it, especially after that trip, to know that none of them even cared. This wasn't even an event on their radars. That, like, I don't even think my grandmother, like, I was basically scolded for ending up miles down the beach. The thing is, though, like, it felt like a shark off the shore and a random lady I've never met since pulling me out of the water literally cared about me more than my own relatives, than my own family. And I just wanted to die. I was completely and utterly rejected. There was nothing for me in this world. You cannot do that to a person and expect them to just not have any sort of extreme reaction from something so entirely extreme. There is a for every reaction that is seen as too extreme or insane, there is a situation in which that is normal. When you mess with things like this, you're creating an insane situation where behaviors that might not otherwise be normal become normal. And if you try and destroy this reaction rather than deal with what's causing it, what ends up happening is you end up with a whole lot more people dead or destroyed until they just drown in self-destruction. I lost a lot of people, but I've also kept some people and we've kept each other's heads above water. But I don't come out of it like the same. You're not. You know things about the world other people don't because they haven't lived it. And there's always those people who like to pretend like they have it so bad. No. You don't even know. And I actually went to school with people like this. They'd be like, oh yeah, I live in the ghetto. I have it so bad. And if you try to tell them even one thing that happened to you, oh, I'm not having a contest with you, but say they were just faking. That's why they thought that it was a contest. Because that's what it was to them. It was never a contest to me. Even whenever I was telling people about things, I was holding back a lot. And I still do, because, I've actually put a therapist in therapy. Just by talking about this stuff. And I didn't actually understand how that was even possible until I took peer support training. And I learned about, I think it's called sympathetic trauma or something. It's where you feel, it's basically extreme empathy. And you feel for this person so strongly, and you are just so jarred by what has happened to them I put a therapist in therapy. Last time, I just outright talked about everything, or at least more than I do. I put a therapist in therapy. I am a civilian. I have never been a soldier. I have no access to that stuff. I have been told by a therapist that I should be treated as someone who grew up in a war zone because there was just so much trauma. And I never was. I don't just mean so much trauma, I mean there would be periods of calm, and then it would all be ripped out. Just gets ripped out right from under you as more shit happens. That same therapist also told me that I had complex PTSD. Not unspecified, complex. And basically that it's damn near impossible to list all of my triggers because I basically live going through them. It is impossible for me to get through a day without a trigger. In some respect, this actually means that my reactions are less extreme because I am dealing with them constantly. But it also means that at some point every single day my body is going through a trauma response. That means it weakens your immune system, it can be a stress on your body in other ways. Because your body does actually react and have a trauma response, which I actually didn't know anything about until I did peer support training. Funny how that works. People with PTSD need to know this, and nobody tells us. I also have, though, a autoimmune disorder, which, means that I have multiple factors making my, and as a little kid, I actually didn't have a very strong immune system to begin with, and they had to, build it up, and, that's getting turned against my body now, and, I have an autoimmune disorder, and they're gonna have to take out my thyroid at one point. There was actually a point somebody tried to scare me, saying that it was something more serious than it is, but it's Hashimoto's. Means that one of these days they're gonna have to take out my thyroid, basically. Because my body is attacking my thyroid. My immune system is. And it causes... I go through absolute heck dealing with it, and I'm just constantly they didn't even know I had it until I lost my boys, and then I've basically been going through a constant, some articles call it a triggered reaction. I've just constantly been going through that since. Constantly. And as far as I can tell, my independent research, because doctors are morons, that's what caused the bleeding too. That's the physical cause for the emotional, the extreme response. Yes, the response is rooted in the bonds there and all that, but, even as a kid, whenever that sort of thing almost killed me, there had to be something there to make it more extreme. And I knew this because whenever I was little, I had febrile seizures and, no immune system. So they actually, I had an extreme case. So I wasn't supposed to make it to preschool. I wasn't supposed to live. And, I did. But, my family was so busy shunning my mom. They didn't really care about that. They weren't rallying around me. Are you kidding me? These people just... My uncle wouldn't even look at me. Let alone interact with me, even then. And there was no label to say, that I was somehow less of a human being. And unfortunately, that's what having any sort of mental health diagnosis to them is. It's like saying you're less of a human being. I have PTSD. That's the only mental health diagnosis I have. It's the only thing, and there are times I've had to prove, just had to go through like extensive things to prove, there was this one who had me bring in people to talk to him and because prove I had stable relationships and just different things. And yeah, I'm capable of having stable relationships. I know, this is, actually, I normally have stable relationships. The funny thing is, it's very hard for me to get to the point that I actually trust someone enough to call them, legitimately a friend. Consider them close. They have to be... There's a lot more that has to happen for that, because I've been burned so much. And in therapy, it's even been said, burn me twice, It's like touching fire and saying, ouch, I've been burned. Well, you cannot force trust. I cannot say, I want to trust this person, so I will. It doesn't work like that. It comes from inside you. And I will bond people before I trust them to handle knowing that, I have feelings of, connection and friendships and stuff. Because there's no trust there. Or at least not the level that I need to trust that they won't use that in some way. That they shouldn't. Or use it to hurt me. And that's not really something that you can or should try to tell someone, oh yeah, don't do that. Because all that does is give you more reasons not to trust people. So it's actually really hard. So once I get people who get past that, usually we're friends for a really long time, unless something really drastic happens. Generally speaking, I'm that person who, be nice to people, but, once you've proven yourself, I'll follow you to hell and back. But I also expect you to do the same. And that's the thing, isn't it? There aren't a lot of people who do that. And that's my standards. I need you to be honest. And I need you to have my back so I can have yours. I also need you not to be a shitty person. If I'm going to have your back, it's because somebody else is being shitty. It's not for petty shit. I'm not a petty person. I expect my friends not to be petty. I expect you to be grown up. Honest, to value honesty, to be able to, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. And I don't want you to tell me what I want to hear either. Unless that's the truth, because I definitely want to hear that. But also, don't be an asshole about it. At least try to put it nicely. And I'll do the same. Those are my standards. And they're actually pretty simple. Pretty easy. But I'm just going to put the whole hell and back thing, because I also learned through what happened to my kids and I that honesty didn't mean that people were going to be there whenever the going got tough. And I was there for them whenever it got tough for them. So I know that's what kind of person I am. Because I've faced myself down in the worst of situations. And there are a number of people who have it. Who want to say the best things about themselves, that they would do only the best things, but the truth of the matter is, nobody knows that till they've been through it. And often you have to face the worst parts of yourself. Not just the worst parts of yourself, but the worst parts of the people around you. Their reactions, their cowardice. people you once thought were brave, you suddenly realize are cowards. It's all hot air. And suddenly you realize that they're looking at you like you're somehow